So now we're going to move on to the family aspect of Italian culture. So, if you had to give a movie title to your family experience as a child, what would it be?
As a child, I would say raucous. And the reason why I say raucous is because around the table, when everybody was eating, there was never a very quiet conversation. Everything was always big, as I'm doing now. Lots of hands moving, lots of people raising their voices. However, we weren't raising our voices because we were mad at each other. It's just the way we talk.
Loud and boisterous hands.
Yes.
So, did you feel like you were a part when you grew up in Jersey City? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel like you were a part of a larger community, like the American community, or were you isolated in your mixed community or the community of your nationality? And how did that influence your outlook on the world?
Well, I grew up in a very small enclave of all Italian families. I went to a Catholic school, which was basically all of the nuns were Italian, every single one of them. However, we did have some Polish kids and some Irish kids and maybe even a German kid. But basically, I would say 90% of the kids were Italian. So I felt very much a part of that subculture. However, I always knew that I was an American. So I never felt that I was more an Italian than I was a part of the United States of America.
Along those lines, did you ever feel like you were discriminated against because you were Italian?
I was never discriminated against ever as a child. Ever. When I got older and moved into other communities, as a young adult, I did experience some discrimination, but nothing that I could say hampered my ability to live or caused any kind of emotional distress. It was just that Italians maybe were not quite as good as Germans were. But of course, I'm sure that the Scottish didn't think the Germans were as good as they were, and that was just the way it went.
So what was the hardest struggles of growing up as an Italian American, and how did they impact your family?
Well, that's kind of a twofold question, because growing up Italian and growing up in my neighborhood were intertwined because we were really, really poor. When I look back at where I lived, it was actually a slum, which most people don't understand. Thank God, most of us here and people that are going to be watching this don't really know what that means. And I didn't grow up in a really low class, very low income neighborhood because I was Italian. It was because my grandparents were not educated. Consequently, they could not get the kind of jobs that would make enough money to move out of the neighborhood. Reason being, when they came here, they had no English. They couldn't speak English. My grandfather learned English really well. My grandmother, this is on my mother's side now, my grandmother really never spoke English. Consequently, because of low income, we lived in a poor neighborhood. That impacted me, not necessarily because we were Italian, but that impacted me because I wanted for my children and grandchildren not to have to live in the same circumstances economically that I did. And I was the first person in my family to go to college.
So we have an Aunt Adelaide and my Aunt Rosanna have one of the American dream stories, rags to riches. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how they overcame their circumstances?
Okay. Well, my father was one of 3 children. He was the youngest and his sister, and his oldest was a brother. My grandmother used to go back and forth to Italy all the time, and she would take the old 8mm movies. And when she came back from Italy one time, she showed a movie, and my uncle, Emil, who was the oldest of the 3, saw this redhead, and he decided he was going to go to Italy and marry her, which he did. He went to Italy, he married her. So they came back and lived in Greenwich Village in New York. This is my father's side. My mother's side not involved with this at all. So they raised 2 girls, Adelaide and Rosanna, on the streets of Greenwich Village. And you would think, well, they're going to be store owners or they're going to be work in a factory. But no, Adelaide started college but decided that was not what she wanted, and she became a very prosperous commercial real estate broker, and she does extremely well. The other daughter became a doctor.
Excuse the phone.
Yes, please excuse the phone.
It's been ringing all day.
Yes. Even though we have signed up for Do Not Call 3 times, we're still getting all of these calls. Anyway, so I attribute the fact that these girls literally went from Greenwich Village to living in $1 million homes because their mother, my aunt, who came from Italy, a very tiny village, very poor village, she had hopes and dreams for her daughters and encouraged them to go ahead, go to school, get educated. I mean, these girls played on the streets of Greenwich Village all of their lives, and yet they had built into them from their parents, I think especially my aunt, that she wanted them to have what she never had.
So, I know family is important to you because you instilled in us. So, how much of that was because of the instilled family values that Italians give to their kids?
I would think that many nationalities feel the same way, that they're instilling family values, the ability and the desire to be together.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think, and maybe Jewish families share this, but in Italian families, it's an extremely strong bond. Has always been. Every Italian family I've ever known has been extremely close, extremely bonded. Living in the United States of America, however, I am second generation. My daughter is third and Michelle is fourth generation. By the time we get down to fourth generation, the children get jobs and go to school at a distance.
Mm-hmm.
That never happened in my generation. Everybody stayed very close to home. So now we all have to work very hard to make sure we're together. We want to keep that value, but we all understand that modern day America is very different from what the 50s and 60s were in the United States and an Italian neighborhood.
So, along the lines with instilling family values, how did you instill that love of family and closeness and watching after your family, that tight family bond that you just spoke about, in your own children and then your grandchildren after that?
The way we did it in our children was to continue the traditions that my grandmother, both my grandmothers, and my mother and father instilled in us. We made sure that when Grandma and Grandpa came over, everybody came over and yelled and said, "Hi, Grandma and Grandpa are here." We made sure that they did that. And we made sure that every single holiday we went to Grandma's house. Every single holiday. There was none of this, oh, the kids want to stay home and play with their toys. Mm-hmm. That was unheard of. On Christmas morning, the kids got up. They got that's her mother I'm talking about. They got up in the morning, they opened their toys, everybody got all dressed up and went to Grandma's house. That was it. There were no ifs, ands, or buts. Then when I married, and when my daughter married and had her children, it was a great joy to walk into their house. And my daughter would say, "Grandma's here," and the kids would run and come to Grandma so they could get hugged. And it's been a wonderful tradition. I've loved it, and I feel very blessed that my grandchildren are close.
We're blessed that you're close, that we're close with you. So, to end the family section, what is your favorite and your worst memory of your childhood? If you can choose.
My worst memory as a childhood, there might be others, but the one that comes to mind is my mother sent me down to the corner store, the candy store, and there was a policeman there, and he was huge. And my head came right up about the distance of where his gun was.
Oh no!
Scared the living daylights out of me. That was very frightening. And the best memory of my childhood, probably when my grandmother took me to live for a summer in Italy when I was 12. That was amazing.
That sounds like it would be a lot of fun.
Mhm.